In this lecture, we're going to look at some themes or some highlights of the prophecy of Jeremiah. Now, one issue that comes up is the issue of false prophecy. False prophecy is this week's discussion question. It's actually fairly complex. It's not really simple to figure out all the time, especially if you're kind of on the ground. But in the particular context of Jeremiah, in the time of Zedekiah, Babylon seemed weak, and so the people in Judah became optimistic. Jeremiah is sent wearing a yoke. A yoke would be what they would put on oxen who would be pulling a plow or a cart or something. And Jeremiah is wearing one of these to tell them that their subjugation to Babylon would endure for a long time. Now, other prophets also speaking in the name of Yahweh, such as Hananiah, were telling the king that everything would be well. Jeremiah, however, makes the point that generally, historically, the prophets who came before prophesied war, famine, and pestilence rather than peace. And as for the prophet who prophesies peace, when the word of that prophet comes true, then it will be known that the Lord has truly sent the prophet. So it's kind of suspect if the prophet is speaking peace right off the bat. It's a sign that perhaps the prophet is not a true prophet, but you kind of have to wait for events to unfold to know for sure. Another feature in Jeremiah is the letter to the exiles, chapter 29. And he's telling them not to expect a speedy return to Judah. He's telling them build permanent homes, raise families, promote the peace and prosperity of Babylon. There is hope, but only after a time of exile. Now, it may seem confusing to be talking about exile at this point because Judah and Jerusalem have not yet completely fallen. This would have been about a decade earlier, and at this point, some of the high officials have been taken off to Babylon. This is sort of the first deportation. And Jeremiah says, "For thus says the Lord, only when Babylon's 70 years are completed will I visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope." Now note the context of that last verse, because sometimes it is used in modern churches, in Christian contexts, without the full context. And it is used to argue that for everything is going to go well for people because God has good plans. But note that the context here is an exile that will last 70 years. So God's plans are good, but they may not seem so in the meantime. One of the distinctives in Jeremiah is the fact that there are a long series of laments or complaints to God that are autobiographical. They are Jeremiah talking to God. And in these, he expresses his frustrations at being a prophet. He complains that his enemies always seem to get the upper hand. He accuses God of abandoning him. He accuses God of seducing him. And the reasons for this is that he receives mistreatment, he is opposed by the priests and the prophets, he is punished by royal officials, he is accused of treason and inciting desertion. An attempt is made to execute him, so he has good reason for his feeling that he's just kind of getting a raw deal. Jeremiah's complaints, of course, have parallels in the Psalms, and we will look at this when we go to the Psalms, and also in Job 3. Job 3, it has some of the same language. Cursed be the day on which I was born, the day when my mother bore me, let it not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought the news to my father, saying, a child is born to you, a son, making him very glad. Let that man be like the cities that the Lord overthrew without pity. Let him hear a cry in the morning and an alarm at noon, because he did not kill me in the womb. So my mother would have been my grave, and her tomb and her womb forever great. Why did I come forth from the womb to see toil and sorrow and spend my days in shame? But despite these complaints, and the fact that the news is very grim, at least in the short term, in regard to Babylon, there are themes of promise and of hope, just as we saw in Isaiah. As a sign of hope, for example, in the darkest days of the siege of Jerusalem in 588, Jeremiah buys property that had been in his family previously. So he's saying, this will end. This affirms his faith that Yahweh would not abandon his people. And there is the promise that Yahweh will make a new covenant with his people, in the same way he made a covenant with them at Sinai, but this time internalized. For the days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will restore the fortunes of my people, Israel and Judah, says the Lord, and I will bring them back to the land that I gave to their ancestors, and they shall take possession of it. On that day I will break the yoke from off his neck, I will burst his bonds, and strangers shall no more make a servant of him. But they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will raise up for them. And he promises that he is going to save them from far away and bring them back from the land of captivity. The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant that I made with their ancestors, when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, a covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, says the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law within them, I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No longer shall they teach one another or say to each other, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, says the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more.